れだけ
Terrible endings, and terrible endings. It is a phrase that we're becoming quite familiar with. Over the past year, it feels like every other major series has been wrapping up, and with each conclusions, we're met with a wave of disappointment. Whether it's My Hero Academia's ending, which many consider underwhelming, or Jujutsu Kaisen's ending somehow managing to be even worse, it seems like the bar gets lower and lower each day. And sadly, another popular manga joins the terrible ending club, Oshi no Ko. Oshi no Ko stands as one of the most impactful and thought-provoking series in recent memory. With its deeply developed characters and a complex storyline, it has reached millions of people's hearts. At its core, the series focuses on revenge, but it does so through emotional depth, character growth, and the consequences of living a life of vengeance. But then it did a complete 180 and said fuck you to the whole series and said fuck you to the readers. And it went from Oshi no Peak to Oshi no Mid. All of this development was completely tossed away in the span of 10 chapters. That reminds me of what happened to Kaguya-sama's ending, same author by the way. And beyond this point, there are gonna be spoilers, so if you haven't, finish the manga and form your own opinions on it first. So with that out of the way, let's head back to the video. There are so many aspects that go untouched in the story of Oshi no Ko. I think most of us heard the similar argument used on Jujutsu Kaisen, where the memory manipulation power of Yuji wasn't explained throughout the entire story, and the same thing can be said for Oshi no Ko. The best example is the supernatural aspect that serves zero purpose to the plot. They proceed to introduce this new mysterious deity-like character, the Crow Girl, with the hinted powers to be able to reincarnate others. Yet, she serves such a minimal role to the story, which makes me wonder why she was even added in the first place. It feels like she was there just for plot convenience, a way to make sure that Aqua and Ruby are always on the path of revenge. And that's pretty much where it all ends, besides her giving us false hope that Aqua could be saved. I mean, come on. Calling Sukuna a fraud is an insult to the character of Crow Girl. Like, what's she doing here? Help him, he's fucking dying! But she just stands here looking at him drowning like, man, what the fuck? And that's not the end of it either. The story seems to suggest many themes, yet it was ultimately abandoned at the end. The story centers around Aqua's revenge, but another part of the story points to Aqua's wish to have a normal life without living a life for vengeance. Moments like this showcase that Aqua isn't as dark as people make him out to be. And Ruby's wish is to become a successful idol like Ai, fulfilling her mother's wish of performing at the Dome. However, Ruby also learns that following in her mother's footsteps, who covers herself in lies, is wrong. Instead, she wants to be someone who surpasses her mother and learns to be herself rather than living in her shadows. These moments in the story truly encapsulate the growth of the two main characters, as well as the characters around them. It makes these characters not one-dimensional. However, Oshi no Ko sacrifices all of these subplots in favor of a tragic ending. All of the wish and hopes they both had were shattered, and the story seemed to abandon many of its earlier themes in favor of shock value. On the other hand, I've heard people argue that Oshi no Ko is a tragic story, which is why the ending fits so well. But personally, reducing Oshi no Ko to just a tragic story does an injustice. It's like calling Attack on Titan as simply a dark fantasy. It doesn't fully credit the many aspects that make the story what it is. One of the things that felt out of place was the last few chapters of Hikaru being truly evil. It felt like it was only there just for the sake of it. In previous chapters, Hikaru seeing Ai's 15-year lie seemed to make him regret his decisions, which was a fucking lie. The way his true evil nature is presented has like no weight to it either. We see Light Yagami's character developing as his mastermind of a villain, but here it just feels out of place. It also makes the whole entire movie arc quite pointless, especially since the intention was cornering Hikaru to have alternative ways to handle the situation. Okay, could you please explain why you added this arc to your story? Oh right, that's a good point. And this post here couldn't have captured my thoughts better. There's just something about the ending where it doesn't feel like a true ending. Everything is so rushed to the point where it feels like you picked a bad ending of a visual novel. One where Aqua questions his final choice on the brink of death, whether he did the right thing or not, almost as if the narrative is urging the player to make a different decision. What makes it even more similar to a bad ending is that every character's development was put back to square one, and the ending contradicts everything these characters were building up, almost as if the history is doomed to repeat itself. For example, Ruby follows the path of Ai, where she hides her grief by telling lies and putting on a fake smile. Akane forever has this guilt of not being able to save the person that saved her, and Kana never being able to confess to Aqua. It feels like the story has come full circle, but in a way that betrays the plot and the character developments the whole series had. Everything seems to be a cycle of bad outcomes the story itself tried to strive away from, and makes this ending genuinely feel more disrespectful than Kana slapping Aqua's corpse. And can we also step back and question Aqua's absolute stupid decision here? What do you mean? Aqua obviously made the best and most rational decision. He's so smart and is so big-brained for doing what he does. There is no way his choices were made with disregard to plot, characters, and development. Definitely not. Choosing to sacrifice himself for Ruby, even though she's already told him that he's the reason she keeps on going, and is the most important person in her life. But he casually throws away his life, without considering everyone else's feelings about him. And it's not like it's hard to figure out either. One of my favorite moments in the manga is when Ruby finally learns that Aqua is actually Goro. In that instant, we get this beautifully heartfelt scene that clearly shows Aqua just how much Ruby treasures him, how much he means to her. It's the kind of moment that should deepen their connection and understand how important they are for each other. Yet Aqua, the quote-unquote mastermind of the story, who spent so long strategizing and calculating, decides to throw it all away by sacrificing himself. Even though this is somewhat in line with Aqua's character, it still feels like a cheap way to pull on the audience's heartstrings. Aqua's desire to live, his moments of vulnerability and hope, were all just a bait to give the readers the hope that he might actually survive. Also, did I mention how the Kogoro is an absolute fraud? It felt like we were being led to believe that Aqua could change, but in the end, it feels like all of that emotional buildup was just discarded for a tragic, yet ultimately hollow conclusion. While I do wish that Aqua had survived, this choice of his isn't entirely the core that's making this ending terrible. It's the way the entire conclusion rushes through everything, with barely any room to breathe. And honestly, out of all the characters that Aqua left behind, Ruby's situation is by far the most heartbreaking. In a way, the current state is even more painful than Ruby's previous life. And at least with Ruby's past, she knew that her time was running out, and while she suffered, there is a certain closure to it. But now Ruby's current situation feels so much worse. She's lost the very last family member that was close to her, and the person that she loved died at the same time. There's no closure as she lies more and more trying to hide her sadness. And another disrespectful part of the ending is when Ruby moves on after a couple of panels. So you're telling me that Ruby, who is absolutely devastated by the news of Sensei's death, just moves on after a couple of panels? Where's this so-called renewed determination coming from? Like what, are we in fucking Undertale? Ruby was portrayed as this someone who was deeply affected by the loss of those she loved, and to have her suddenly bounce back from such a loss feels so disingenuous. There's no showcase of how she processed this grief, or her journey to find strength again. It just happens. It feels like the story should have had extra 20 to 30 more chapters to do justice to this emotional arc, but instead everything just happens in a rushed 2 to 3 chapter sequence, leaving no room for proper resolution or development. Throughout the entire story, the spotlight that Ruby received is far less than what she should have had. Like, are we forgetting that Ruby is supposed to be the second protagonist of the story? We barely got to see any growth, and the only moment that she shined was the mainstay arc, but rest was pretty much snatched away from her. Another character whose spotlight was taken away is Kana, and I don't think I'm crazy for saying this, but throughout the entire story, Kana served such a minimal role to the entire story. If we removed Kana's role from the series, there would practically be no difference to the conclusion. While reading some of the recent chapters, I was led to believe that Akane pushing Kana to confess was meant to prevent Aqua from taking his own life or doing something reckless, but none of that actually happened. I find it quite ironic that an entire arc of the manga focuses on the importance of having a compelling story, which is achieved through delivering the perfect ending and a message for the movie. But funnily enough, all of this is contradicted by the manga itself with a lackluster and dog shit ending. And while we're on the topic of messages, what exactly is the story of Oshinoko trying to convey? Is it telling us to give up? Because no matter what we do, we'll always end up back where we started. That's pretty much the impression that I got. And the ending left me with the most hollow feeling that I've ever experienced from a manga. Not those types of hollow endings where you feel satisfied but want more, but a hollow feeling where everything happens so quickly that you're left with nothing but a sense of complete emptiness. I think I went off on a bit of a tangent, but the story had so much potential, but it feels like it was super rushed, and I don't think it was due to like lack of planning either. In other series, these types of lackluster endings are often a result of tight deadlines or a decline in popularity, but those excuses don't necessarily apply to Oshinoko for obvious reasons. In fact, if we go all the way back to season 1 of the anime, we can see Aqua's death literally foreshadowed on the ending song. It's quite literally one-to-one match with the manga panel, and the season 2 ending which offers a foreshadowing from Ruby's perspective. However, I do think one of the reasons which led to this unsatisfying conclusion is that Aka Akasaka just got bored of Oshinoko. If we look at his past works, we can see this happening in Kaguya-sama, and it was partly because he started started working on a new series, which was Oshi no Ko at the time. And funnily enough, he mentioned that he was working on the new manga in 2025, which could explain why Oshi no Ko ended the way it did. Personally, as someone who invested myself emotionally and followed along for 2 to 3 years, it just frustrates me to see how the author proceeded to ruin his work just like that at the last minute. And as I've said before, it just feels genuinely disrespectful to the readers to give this slop of an ending. I would have much rather preferred the other questionable ending. And at the end of the day, even if I don't accept it, the story is over. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I obviously couldn't explain all the issues I had with the ending. Like, for example, the Ruby's DVD, which was pretty much unexplained and just ended. Or the whole entire interaction with Serena's mother. None of that was explained throughout the story. So yeah, I tried to cover all the main issues I had with the ending, and I wanted to put my thoughts out there and see if people agree with me or not. If there are any points that I've missed or points that you don't agree with, comment down below. I'll probably going on AO3 to read better fanfic endings, but yeah. Thank you if you watched till the end, and see ya.